Hey, everybody, and welcome to our latest episode of our Tick Bootcamp podcast. We're here today with Julie Mellae, who's the author of Australian Lyme Crimes, The Global Disgrace. I'm back today with Kelsey Hall to co-host this interview, and Kelsey was featured on episode 242 of our podcast titled SOT Saved Me. So I'm going to hand it off to Kelsey, who's going to walk us through Julie's Lyme story, her personal Lyme story, and then we're going to get into her book and all of the facts she's been able to discover and share with the world.
Thanks, Matt. I'm so excited to be here with you guys again. And it's so nice to meet you, Julie. I'm happy to be doing this with you as well.
Good morning,
I'm gonna
Kelsey.
start off by asking you how old you are and where do you live?
Well, the age bit, I don't know if you really need to know. But I live in Sydney, Australia, and I can say that I'm in my 60s.
Okay.
I live in Sydney. I used to live in the Royal National Park, which is south of the CBD. And our Royal National Park is the second largest in the world. Yours is Yellowstone National Park is the largest. So you can imagine how big it is. I live there with my son. And I called it nature's masterpiece because as a single mother, I was widowed when I was pregnant with my son. We moved down into, you call it the forest, we call it the bush, down into the bush with water views, trees, marsupials, birds. Like it was teeming with wildlife. Beautiful, lovely place to raise a child. And that was all good. I had no idea about insects, ticks. I was an inner city girl. You don't get bugs in the inner city. So I was completely ignorant. I used to garden a lot and pick ticks off me, but still I had no idea about them, no education. Wouldn't have had a clue until as my son grew older, we were pulling ticks off each other. The possums dropped them, the birds dropped them, the wallabies and the wombats dropped them, and the little bilbies dropped them.
I'm gonna pause you right there, Julie. I want to know, I want you to get into depth and describe your life a little bit more before you had Lyme disease. Go into what you did for work, what your school life was like, your social life, your family, etc.
Well, I'm an ex-advertising executive and I ran an advertising agency with my husband. We had a lot of the top accounts in Sydney, so we were very successful, very busy, and we had a lot of friends, so we worked hard, we partied hard back in those days in the 80s, and life was really good, you know. So it was a big life. But when I moved to the national park, I decided to semi-retire just for a bit in order to raise my son. So I taught myself glass art and eventually became an exhibiting artist nationally around Australia. I had a little gallery and I was on the art trail in Bundina Main Bar with some of the best artists in Australia. So, you know, our work used to be exhibited at the National Gallery in Sydney. So it was a big time. When I was bitten, when I became very sick, I wasn't well enough to even cut glass. I couldn't stand long enough.
And at what age did your symptoms start to come on?
2016, so I was in my 50s, and I think I had it for quite some time before it kicked in, as a matter of fact. I always felt that something wasn't quite right. I always felt fatiguey, but then I put that down to being, you know, a single mother, father, hunter gatherer, and all the doings of of being a mum.
I
So
can definitely relate to that. I have 2 young kids myself, so I can definitely relate to that. And it's
yes,
easy. I did the same thing. It was so easy to just pass it off on postpartum, or I'm just, a tired mom. I'm running around. I have 2 young kids.
yes,
It's so
yes, running
easy
around.
to blame it on other things once you
And I
start to
did.
feel more fatigued and achy, and
I
or you blame it
did.
on, oh, I'm getting a little bit older, there's so many things you can pass it off as once the weird symptoms start.
And I was an older mother anyway. I had my son when I was 33, and I was the oldest mother on the maternity ward. So they sort of looked at me back then as if, I was a freak. But nonetheless,
Incredible though. That's incredible though. I'm 31 now, and I have a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old, and yeah,
good for you. You've
that's
got
amazing.
more energy than I had.
Ugh, yeah. I try.
So I just put it down to all those things,
Right,
thinking I need to go to bed earlier or something, I'm
right.
just not quite right. But, I managed through probably 5 years of being unwell before it hit me like a Mack truck.
Yeah.
And I believe that was from an emotional breakdown, in that on one particular week, my best girlfriend died of a brain tumor,
I'm so sorry
and
about that.
I wrote my car off in a car accident that I created. And I couldn't understand why I'd made such a bad decision and how I'd crashed this car. I was lucky to be alive. And from that week on, my health spiraled out of control. And
And it's not uncommon. It's not uncommon for people that go through experiences like that, where they hit a traumatic event, whether that be a car accident or a childbirth, or a divorce or death of a family member, and it's like this big emotional or physical trauma that really stirs things up,
yes,
begins to stir things up. I can actually relate to that as well, because I had a traumatic pregnancy with my son, and that's when everything started to
yes,
come up.
yes.
So it's not uncommon, and I really do believe that these things can kind of live dormant in our body for a little bit, where it's like it may affect us here and there or mildly, and then we just have these things
It was
come up.
mild. It
Yeah,
wasn't a big deal, just something niggling
something you
inside.
start to question, and then this big thing happens, and
Wham, I
oh,
was gone. And, like I was getting sicker and sicker. And then I'm thinking, it's a flu. I'll
yeah.
get over it. It'll be okay. Take all my vitamins like I do. And I exercised regularly, and went hiking, you call it, through the bush. Like I was really fit and active. And then I wasn't. And I kept telling my friends, oh, like, I'm not well. I think it's just a flu. It'll pass. And then one of my girlfriends said to me, Julie, you've had this flu for 3 months now and you're getting worse. And I went, oh, no, I don't know that I'm getting worse. You don't realize how sick you're becoming until you hit rock bottom and
Right.
you go, I can't get out of bed.
You were living in denial for a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, I kept going. I was a social person. You got to look
Right.
after the house, the family, feed the dog. You've got
Yeah,
to do
you just
things.
kept pushing through. You did not want to crash and burn.
No, no. So, I went to my local doctor and said, look, I'm not feeling well. And I'd lost, like 10 kilos, which is probably equivalent to 7 or 8 pounds. But I'm a little person, so it was very noticeable. She said, don't worry. She said, you've probably just got parasites. And I went, all right. And she said, I'll give you something and it'll get rid of the parasites and we'll live happily ever after. Well, I took this thing for a week. I passed out on the floor for 24 hours, woke up covered in my own vomit. The dog wouldn't even eat it. That's how toxic it was. And I thought something's so wrong here. So You know,
what age was that where
I was
you got
about
diagnosed?
55.
Okay.
So I'd been on the floor for 24 hours, and I went to the doctor, and she said, "We'll test you again, see what's going on." No parasites. So, oh, well, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I think you need an attitude adjustment. And really, Julie, I think you're attention seeking. I went, What about this weight loss? What about the color of my skin? It was like grey. I looked ghostly, and most of us do. And she said, "Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with you." That was the first alarm bell, because I knew I'm not a hypochondriac and I can tough it out. This
Right.
wasn't right.
You knew deep in your
This,
soul that something was not right.
oh, look, when you pass out on the kitchen floor and wake up covered in your vomit, something's wrong.
Right.
You know.
That doesn't just happen for no reason. It's not a fluke.
So I'd taken this awful
And
drug.
you were a very healthy person too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I thought, that's my responsibility as being a single mum. I've got to stay healthy,
right.
in order to run a household. And being in the Royal National Park, it's isolated. So I had to be prepared for everything, food in the pantry looked like an Amish pantry, petrol in the car in case there was, a bushfire or, something terrible had happened. It took 20 minutes drive, and it's a winding drive out of that national park to get to civilization. So that doesn't sound bad, but it is if you're stuck.
Right.
So I was prepared for every logistic. I was not prepared to be this sick.
Yeah. I don't think anyone ever is.
No.
How many doctors would you say that you saw before you ultimately received your Lyme diagnosis? And out of those doctors you saw, did you get any kind of misdiagnoses?
Oh, no, I didn't get any type of diagnosis except I'm probably a hypochondriac, and
Parasites.
yeah, parasites. There's nothing wrong with you. Don't waste our time. Or are you drug hunting? Like, was I doctor shopping and drug hunting? I didn't want any drugs. I wanted to get better,
I do find it very interesting too that your doctor right off the bat said that you could have parasites because I mean, I don't know about in Australia, but in the US, I mean, that's definitely not something that doctors jump to right off the bat, just based off of my other conversations with other Lyme patients. Because
Yes.
parasites ultimately can be an issue, as well, but that's usually not something that doctors jump straight to. Usually here in the US, I hear a lot of, oh, it was rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, or, a lot of these like more autoimmune like illnesses. So I do find it kind of interesting that your doctor jumped to that.
Yeah. Well, actually, it was. And there's
It was.
new science here that I'm working with right now that suggests that within the Borrelia are parasites, or actually within parasites lies the Borrelia. So I advocate for all my Limeys on my Facebook page, Australian Lyme Crimes, to do parasite cleanses regularly and to do them over, a good period of time, because these parasites breed by the millions, and we've got to keep up with the cycle of the parasite in order to kill them off. So
yeah, I believe they're within all of us. I mean,
yeah,
that we eat and
I don't know about America, but in Australia in the 60s, there was a family routine that once a month you wormed the kids and you wormed the animals and and the parents were wormed. It was a cycle that we did every single month. And I started to think about that. And now it seems that the whole parasite issue, which I think is really important, is covered up. It's a new cover up, which is, it sounds bizarre, but I've spoken to a few doctors since, and I actually dropped this doctor for telling me I was a hypochondriac, and she used to be a friend, which really hurt. This parasite thing is really dangerous, and we've discovered the parasite within the Borrelia, or the Borrelia within the parasite. So we're looking at something different now as well. So we're trying to figure out if it's an evolutionary process, if it's a biochemical process, what the hell it is, because nobody talks about worming the kids, the dogs, the cats, and mum and
Yeah.
dad.
I do find that so interesting too that you say that. That was kind of like a once a month thing, and we don't do that here
Yes,
in the US, but we
no,
do it for our I mean, we deworm our animals. Why don't we
that's right.
deworm ourselves? You know,
Exactly. Yeah, you kiss
it
the
kind of
dog, you
makes
kiss the
sense,
cat. Yeah, you're going to have worms.
right?
So that's
So,
a very important part of my research at the moment. I know the tick that got me, like that had made me sick.
so you
Where,
did find the tick on you.
oh, this particular tick, I got on a weekend. I was still working in the city and traveling back to the national park. Had no idea, but I had this terrible headache. And I'm on the phone chatting to a girlfriend and blah, blah. And then I found this sultana thing in the back of my neck. And I thought, oh, geez, I wonder what that is. And I tried to pull and it wouldn't come out. And then I twisted it, squeezed it, and ripped it out.
Oh.
Now, I still didn't know what it was. So I went to my inner city doctor the next day and I went, oh, look, I pulled this thing out of my neck last night. Something's still in there. And she looked and she went, ew. She said, you've got Lyme mouthpieces stuck in the back of your neck, right on a lymph system. And she said, I don't know if you're going to get sick, but you probably won't. I went, all right, I don't care. You just get it out. So that particular tick was paralysis tick. It was pregnant. I squeezed all the eggs inside of my body, including all the toxins. You know, sheer stupidity.
So you had never seen a tick before. You didn't know what it
No,
was like. Wow.
no. I mean, we'd pulled little nymph ticks off each other, but we still didn't realize what they were.
Yeah.
But this
So
big
this
thing,
doctor that found the tick, I guess the mouthpiece embedded in you,
mouthpieces.
is that the doctor that ultimately diagnosed you or no?
No, no, she had
So
no.
so
It is.
what doctor did ultimately diagnose you? And when they did diagnose you, was it a clinical or did they do a blood test?
Eventually, after being gaslit by other doctors, and by this stage, which is, 2 years later, I've got lesions on my skin and what feel like things crawling under my skin. So they were coming out of me everywhere. I was covered in lesions. And eventually, an allied health worker convinced me to go to a medical centre where this new Spanish doctor was looking after Lyme patients. I went, no, not seeing any more doctors. All I do is get gaslit. Nobody believes me. I'm not going to any more doctors. I'd been to about 8 or 9. Look, I just got sick of it and I was too sick to bother. Really, I was too sick to bother. And I thought, look, if I'm going to die, that's the way it is. Great Spirit knows what to do with me, I suppose. And
I'm gonna pause you right there because that's a very powerful thing that you just said, and I know a lot of other people that have gone through chronic Lyme disease and have suffered the way that you have, and I know myself personally have felt that way at some point in time. I mean, I
Just take me.
remember
Yeah.
just laying in my bed at night, just take me,
Yeah, just take me.
it's
Just take me.
and no one should ever go through that amount of
No,
suffering.
no.
Never.
And by this time, I'm really shitty. I'm really cranky that nobody can tell me what's going on. I was having Reiki and I was having massages. I was riddled in pain by this stage, especially in my hips. I could barely walk. And my house had stairs, and I had to get a stick from out in the bush to walk around the house. It was shocking. Nobody should go through any of this. So eventually I acquiesced. I went to this doctor, and he came out of his surgery, and he was this angel. He was, and I say in my book, he's about 6'72". He's got this mop of hair, this beautiful, genuine smile. And I looked at him and I thought, oh, this is an angel. I feel so much better. There's nothing wrong with me now. I feel great. I can go home. So he took me in. I couldn't get out of the chair. The arthritis had seized me up. I couldn't get out of the chair. And he lifted me up and carried me into his rooms. And he asked what was going on, where I lived. I told him about the tick bites, the tick situation down there. I was very aware of it by that time. And he said, well, of course, you've got Lyme disease. These are all the classic symptoms that you've got. And I went, yeah, but what about these lesions on my skin? He said, oh, no, I don't know about that right now, but let's do some investigation. So we did all the normal.
Was he a Lyme? Was he like kind of like a mainstream doctor? Was he a Lyme literate? I don't know if they have those in Australia.
They're all deregistered. We don't have any now.
Okay.
He wasn't, but when he did his degree in Spain, they studied Lyme disease.
Mm.
So it was perfectly natural to him that that's what it was. So we did all the basic bloods and everything else. And of course, it didn't come up positive for Lyme disease. And that's hidden here as well. But
Right.
it did.
How is the testing there in Australia? Because I believe the statistic here is it's like less than 50%.
Oh, look,
Here.
I think it's even less than that
Yeah.
here. I mean, it's so dodgy.
But he ultimately did do a blood test, but it was negative. So he clinically diagnosed you.
He did, but I had Epstein-Barr virus. I had chlamydia pneumonia. I've got this. I've got that. He went, well, you are sick, but the Lyme didn't
You
show
test
up.
positive for other tick-borne diseases and
Yeah,
Epstein-Barr. Okay.
and he said, I still believe you have it. So I end up going to a private clinic that deal only with tick-borne disease blood tests, and that's where it came up positive. So I knew.
And what test was that? Do you remember the name of it?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I know it's not Alyssa because it rarely shows up. We reckon here about 30%.
Okay. I know the common ones here like Vibrant, IGeneX, medical diagnostic labs, those are kind of like the more accurate testing, but the ELISA and the Western blot are no good.
So this is a private lab, probably like IGeneX,
Right.
that do testing for tick-borne illness. And the reason I end up there as well is because I'm getting really suspicious about this whole thing. And I'm talking to Dr. Gorgeous about it. And he went, I'm not meant to treat you. I'm not meant to talk about it. I'm going to help you as much as I can. And I'm going, well, why? He said, because it's a bioweapon. I said, it is not. he said, I can't say anything more. So that was okay.
And he didn't offer to put you even on like a 2-week stint of doxycycline or any kind of antibiotic at that time?
He didn't work.
Right. So
Um,
that was your first means of treatment was
yes,
antibiotic.
yes,
That's kind of where
yes.
it started. And then, so after you got your diagnosis, you tried the antibiotics, that didn't work. What direction did you go from there?
Um, I decided to keep I was going into dementia, which scared me.
Right.
And there's no way that, a high powered woman with a child is going to do that. So I started to research very heavily about this disease. And of course, upon realizing that there's no cure, I grieved for myself. Um, and then I just kept thinking, this is wrong. Why can't I get a cure? Why is it a bioweapon? What's going to happen next? So then I decided
It's part of the grief cycle as well. Yeah, the anger, the bargaining, the depression, all of that. And I think it's important for other people to hear too that others go through that, because
I cried
when you do get sick like this, you grieve the loss of who you
myself. I
right.
grieved the loss of myself, what I was capable of doing. I lost my livelihood. I couldn't cut glass anymore. I couldn't create anything anymore, and neither did I want to. And I really had a pity party going for months until I came to terms with it all. Well, Dr. Gorgeous happened to do evening work at the clinic, and most nights were insomnia nights anyway. So I'd drive up to the clinic and talk to him. And so went through the Hippocratic Oath. Where else can I look for information to understand better what the big problem is with this disease? And he used to sit with me for hours, and we would talk about um, medical issues, why somebody needs to write a book about this. And I was very angry at that time. I think my anger lasted for years. And that's why I wrote the book. I was going into dementia. I'd gotten over, well, maybe I hadn't, the grief process, because the anger lasted forever. And that's how the book evolved.
So after the antibiotics, did you try anything else? Did you try herbs? Did you try any kind of other therapies that could help
Well,
you?
well, like all of us, I needed help. And so I had Reiki, I had a herbalist, I had weekly Rife sessions, and all of it helped. But during that, I had two near-death experiences with my masseuse, and both times she recognized what was happening, and it would shake me and go, "You're not going to die here. You're not going to die here." And
Do you believe that you were experiencing like extreme like Herxheimer reactions while that was
I
occurring?
think I was
Right?
dying.
That's experience. You just think your body was just giving up.
I would just black out and fall on the floor and like wouldn't remember.
Right.
So,
Which is
and
definitely
during
awful and dreadful to go through, but again, not uncommon too. I mean, I definitely recall having experiences when I was going through treatment, whether it was antibiotics, herbs, or whatever it was I was doing. I was having extreme, I believe them. I mean, I believe they were just really bad Herxheimer reactions to where I would have seizures or pass out and black out and not remember anything, hallucinations, and it was just awful. So I'm so sorry you had to go through that as well. Um, so how long would you say you treated until
I'm
you
still,
started to
I'm
notice
still
a
treating.
significant difference? or get to a better quality of life?
Maybe 2.5 years, when the arthritis passed. It's still covered in lesions and still these dreadful things coming out of my skin. I'd have detox baths and the bath would be covered and they look like ants. And I'd get a magnifying glass and look at these things, had arms and legs. They were insects creeping out of my skin. So now I know Morgellons disease happening. I've also got Lyme disease happening. And you don't know how to treat one before the other, as well as Epstein-Barr virus, as well as all the other tick-borne co-infections. So I said to this Dr. Gorgeous, like, this fatigue is killing me. Like, I just can't deal with this. And I'd been reading and I said to him, look, Epstein-Barr is in the herpes family. So if it's in the herpes family, why can't I have Valacyclovir or something within the medication of herpes that may or may not work? And God love him, he said yes. He said, I hadn't thought of it. It's a great idea. A week later, I got out of bed. The Valacyclovir had kicked in. It was a miracle.
So that was a big game changer for the Epstein-Barr virus for you.
Absolutely. It was huge. Then I discovered reading low dose naltrexone. So he prescribed that for me. That took care of the arthritis. And although I didn't feel great, I was out of bed and I could go to the shops and I could do a few more things that I wasn't capable of doing. So those two drugs, and I don't like taking jobs, I prefer herbals, but they were game changers, both of them.
Yeah, and we often refer to all of these things that come along with Lyme disease, whether it be co-infections or the viruses or whatever. I mean, you're just one big onion, and it's so important to find a doctor or somebody that'll help you to kind of just peel those things back layer by layer. And it's really a trial and error process of, okay, what works and what doesn't, or what order do we need to go in, and are we going too fast? Do we need to slow down? And it's a journey to figure out what works and what doesn't, and it's different for everyone.
It is different. That's right. So I was pleased to be in that space. I still couldn't work. I had to sell my house. I had to sell my studio. I had to sell everything, which was heartbreaking.
Because you're paying for all this out of pocket, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Had to move in with my son and daughter-in-law, which is, my health depended on rest. And this is where I continued to research. By this time, my Dr. Beautiful had been deregistered. He'd been caught by the Australian authorities for treating Lyme patients. I went there one afternoon and he was gone. And the staff that worked there were very hostile because Lyme disease does not exist in Australia. No doctor is allowed to treat Lyme disease in Australia. And he'd been caught by the health police and deregistered. And we're at a stage now where every doctor in Australia that we know of that was Lyme disease aware or happy to participate in the treatment of Lyme disease patients have all been deregistered. They've lost their livelihoods.
So that's still happening now. So
well, absolutely.
You really don't have any doctors.
We're on our own. And so I say to my viewers that, we become honorary doctors. We have to learn to treat ourselves in order to stay alive, one, two, to have some semblance of order in our lives if we can, and that's a lot of experimentation. I had no idea what Herxheimer reaction was. I had no idea on anything, and most of us don't.
And what are you doing now to treat? Are you doing anything now, or
Oh,
what's
yes.
helping you now that you've reached a little bit of a better spot? What's kind of, is there something that's holding you steady or helping you progress even more?
Progression, it's backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
You know, it's like 3 steps forward, 4 back. And now, you know, it's 2 steps forward and half back. I'm sort of getting there. You know, I use NAC, I use lion's mane. The B group vitamins are very, very good. And I was listening to Dr. Ardis, who was discussing long COVID and what a protocol was for that. And I ended up with COVID. And, you know, it was no big deal. It's not like Lyme. It was just a sniffle. So,
Did that set you back at all?
yes, like 20 steps. I couldn't get past the fatigue again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't Epstein-Barr. It was a different type of fatigue. And he had a protocol that he put together when he discovered that smokers, cigarette smokers, didn't actually have long-term COVID. And he couldn't work out why. So he studied and worked out the nicotine was protecting them from the long-term COVID. So the protocol is to use nicotine patches and chewing gum, the nicotine chewing gum, and give it a week and you'll be okay. Well, I thought, I'm going to try that. I'll try anything, as we do. We'll try anything if we think it's going to make us feel better, you know. And I did, and it worked. It actually worked. This nicotine therapy was fantastic.
It helped you get over that
Fatigue again.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what percentage would you say you are right now,
Of wellness?
you know, as opposed, you know, your old self versus now? Like, how close are you being back to your old self?
Oh, look, maybe 65%.
Okay.
I still don't have
It's
the
such a
get up
hard
and
question to answer
it
too.
is. And look, I've aged too, which, you know, like I'm going, so is it my age? Is it the Lyme? But look, my body tells me when I have to stop.
Right.
And I'm sure once upon a time I wouldn't have listened and kept on going, you know, because I could. Now I can't.
That's a very hard question, Julie. We've had people answer, I'm 87.3% recovered. I'm like, what does that mean, right? It's just a really weird, arbitrary question. But, you know, we understand that those of us in the chronic Lyme community, this becomes a lifestyle change. It's a lifelong effort for us to live healthy, continue to find things to help us. And it's a completely different way of living. But I think, you know, it's a way of living that makes us healthier as a result of it, right? But I really want to talk to you more about your book, The Australian Lyme Crimes, the Global Disgrace. And, you know, this is a really interesting topic. And I want to give a trigger warning here because it does highlight the corruption around Lyme disease. And it does highlight Lyme disease being created as a bioweapon. So if this is going to be triggering to anybody, you may want to tune out now. And, you know, we got Julie's part of her story and what she's done and her tips and tricks on her own personal Lyme journey. But now we're going to delve into your book. So specifically how America, Australia, Russia, all these large nations came together and how they were involved in creating the bioweapon that is Lyme disease today. So can you share with us, Julie, what, you know, your research developed? Because you shared with Kelsey how it got on your radar by your doctor, right? But you now share with us when you started researching and what that rabbit hole was like and what you were learning and what information you eventually learned to put in your book.
Look, I was angry that I couldn't find help. I was very sick. I still have Morgellons disease, which has calmed down somewhat. But my last trigger was I'd been collecting all these buggy things out of my detox bath. I went to see an infectious disease doctor who laughed at me. And this is like by then doctor number 9. And he saw the lesions on my arms and told me that if I just get off the ice, I'd be perfectly okay. And I was horrified. I cried for days. But I'd already started to look into this whole Lyme crisis. And what I was discovering, I didn't like. And I wished, I hoped that it wasn't true. But the more I kept looking, the more evidence I was finding that actually is true. It is a bioweapon. It was initially created in Australia before the Cold War, before Plum Island, before Fort Detrick, and that was in 1940, where we have a government agency called the CSIRO, and that's the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation. Were involved with Sydney University and the Russian military creating tick bioweapons. So
Julie,
that
quick question there, because a lot of people listening might be saying, wait a second, Otzi the Iceman from thousands of years ago had Borrelia burgdorferi in his blood when they found him frozen and we thawed him out. Within the last 20 years, we've been able to identify that. So are you saying that Lyme has been around for thousands of years, but it was engineered in a lab to become more virulent and to become more of a disease that's going to be crippling and debilitating?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it was. I've researched our own Aboriginal tribes here. And yes, they used to get tick sick. They used to get a form of Lyme disease, and they called it Madfeller's disease because it affected them neurologically and they went off, like we all have. And they used sarsaparilla and were sick for maybe 6 weeks and got over it. Now, I've used sarsaparilla for 6 weeks and it didn't do anything. So we know that the first lab production was that I know of in Australia was in the 1940s. And then we move over to Plum Island with you guys.
Before you go to Plum Island, can we pause there, Julie? So you talked about Australia and Russia in the 40s before Plum Island. So what did your research bring to light there? So can you give us some specific details about what they were doing? So you said that they were using ticks and investigating using ticks as bioweapons. So what specific details can you share about that time in the 40s between Russia and Australia?
At this time, Russia had already worked on ticks, and the CSIRO were approached with handfuls of money to look at weaponizing the ticks at Sydney University, and they did that quite happily for 4 or 5 years. Australian records are very difficult to get hold of. The cover-up is huge, so much has been destroyed. So I feel that Sydney University were paid an awful lot of money by the Russian government to do these processes. Now, I did come up with records that the CSIRO had been involved with the collaboration of this bioweapon at Sydney University, but the depth of it and what they actually did, I can't tell you.
So essentially, you have proof that Sydney in Australia, Sydney University, was doing studies on behalf of the Russian government with ticks, but the details you have not been able to find, but you do know they were starting to do some research about making them bioweapons, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's in the 40s. Now, fast forward, I'm sorry, if you can give us some, a time frame here about when you're talking about Plum Island. And if you don't mind going into that part of your book as well.
Okay, well, after discovering what was happening at Sydney University, I grieved. I became very, very distressed about, the whole thing. Then I got into Plum Island, and that blew my mind away because
For context, Julie, can you, before you go into the details, Plum Island it's an island that's very close to where I live. And it's an island where a lot of studies were done. And specifically, they were studying animal diseases, right? It was a federal research facility dedicated to studying animal diseases. And there's a ton of conspiracy theories out there, which, I am inclined to believe that there was a ton of Lyme and tick research happening there as well. So is there anything else you want to add as far as context for our listeners about Plum Island before you go on to the details?
well, it was run essentially by Nazi war criminals who were repatriated, can you believe it, from Germany after World War II. Now, these Nazi scientists and engineers and different specialists were actually repatriated around the world, including Australia, after the war, so that research into bioweapons, into the space program could continue. And I just forgot what I was saying. Stop.
No, Julie, that was excellent background. So you were kind of laying some background context before getting into the details about what you laid out in your book, right? What is Plum Island? Who was running Plum Island? And you did that brilliantly, explaining what that is. So now we got all these former Nazis coming to run Plum Island to do these deep secret experiments, and these experiments focusing on animals, particularly potentially Lyme disease and ticks, right? And then your research led you even further to find some more information you're going to share with us.
Dr. Eric Traub was the main specialist on Plum Island. He was actually a vet. He hated animals, so who knows why he wanted to be a vet. So he was experimenting with different viruses on animals, with ticks in animals. He was weaponizing with Willy Bergdorfer. That's how Australians say it. I don't know how you say it. And so they collaborated together also in creating these toxic ticks that were deliberately militarily manufactured in order to knock off the enemy and make their animals sick. So between the two of them, Willie and Eric Traub, they created billions of toxic ticks, which they stored in the 8-ball at Fort Detrick on Maryland. And the ticks just kept breeding up. And it held something like 1 million liters of toxic ticks.
Okay, so Julie, I'm going to pause you there because I want to get some more details on, I think you said 8-ball in Maryland. And Maryland, I think Kelsey is considering moving now because of that. So thanks for that.
I was going to say, I actually live 15 minutes away from Fort Detrick.
Oh. Don't go. Don't go.
Maryland. Yeah.
No. Do you have to?
Well, I do like it out here. It's scenic and nice, but
stay away from that place.
It's been there for a long time, as long as I've been alive.
Okay, girlfriend.
But let's just lay some more groundwork here, right? So Willy Bergdorfer was an entomologist and a bacteriologist. So basically, he studied insects and he studied bacteria, and he got his PhD in zoology, parasitology, bacteriology from the University of Basel in 1952. But he moved to the U.S. in 1951 and joined the Rocky Mountain Laboratory in Hamilton, Montana, right? And he worked for the NIH, the National Institute of Health. So here we have somebody who has a background in bacteria, parasites, aka ticks, right? All these things. And now he's working for the U.S. government at the Rocky Mountain Labs. in a division of the NIH, National Institute of Health. So and then now Eric Traub is also working for Plum Island in another research facility. So how did they end up collaborating? Because it sounds like they're at different places, but yet they work together to create these bioweapons and then somehow put them over in Maryland, right by Kelsey's house. How did that happen?
There was communication in those days. They did have telephones by then, and they did have good transport systems. And this is another thing I've discovered, is that they're all involved in each other. Traub's a Nazi, war criminal. Bergdorfer is now taking orders from Traub. Somehow, Willie is making a shit ton of money, which they discover is from the Russians, and he was a double agent.
Wait, Willy Bergdorfer, who discovered Lyme disease, he identified the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. He was in the pocket of the Russians. So he was working for the Russians as a double agent, getting all this money to do what? So what else have you found? Like, what is he doing? Is he experimenting on ticks on behalf of the Russian government while working for the U.S. government?
Yes. And giving them scientific information that he discovered. He kept providing the Russians with information. He got paid. And his Swiss bank account was magnificent by the time he died. Now, he didn't share any of that with his family. He kept quiet about it. And people wanted to know, like, how did he make all this money? Because being the scientist, he was, it was a modest paying job. He did get, many accolades for discovering the bacteria. And he was the golden boy of Fort Detrick. But he was making money on the sly. But at the same time, I'm discovering that Australia inherited Joseph Himmler.
I'm sorry, can you repeat his name? Dr. Joseph?
Mengele. We inherited Joseph Mengele, SS Nazi, who was the second-hand man of Hitler. Mengele was Traub's boss during the Holocaust. So they were well connected.
So these are all Nazis. One went to Australia, one came to the States, and the right hand of Hitler is now in Australia, who was the boss of Eric Traub, who's now in the States, correct?
That's right.
Okay, I'm just trying to keep up. I mean, this is kind of wild stuff, so.
It's huge. It's huge. And I've only just discovered some of the Australian Nazi routine. So even Mengele is in touch with Traub, and Bergdorfer. They're all in touch with each other. Then I discover that there's another virologist, Dr. Frank McFarlane Burnett, who's Australian, who is also working on bioweapons through the CSIRO at Sydney University with his buddy, Joseph Mengele, our Nazi. So, it's all a happy circle. In the end, it just gets wilder and wilder. In the end, like, they've all met, they've all colluded together. They're all happy families, and we're still creating bioweapons happily in Australia with the CSIRO. Now, I listened to a podcast just recently with a spokesperson from the CSIRO, and they were asked, what research are you doing now? They said, we're not doing any research. We've been building bioweapons for the last 10 years. So they're still at it.
But okay, so here's the part where, Chris Newby's book, Bitten, highlighted a lot of this as well. We've had other people on this podcast come on and share information as well about these things. But the part that really is the most mind-blowing is that, and I want to give a shout out to Adam Finnegan as well, because he talked a lot about this on the podcast just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
And we're very appreciative for all of you for bringing light to these serious matters, and they can help us, the people who are sick, because if we better understand what was done to bioengineer these ticks, maybe we can better help people who are suffering, right? Because that's what it all comes down to: is millions and millions of people across the globe are suffering more than ever from tick-borne illnesses and chronic Lyme disease, which encompasses all the pathogens, right? Not just Lyme, but all the things they stuff these ticks with. But if we can reverse engineer or better understand what was done, we can help all of us better. And we have governors in New Jersey who are trying to help bring this to light. They're trying to force all these classified documents to be released, but we're getting a lot of cone of silence, for lack of a better phrase, meaning these government entities are kind of locking up and not willing to release this information. So in your book, you talk about government cover-ups and all these things, right? So it seems so wacky, but tell us why these governments would work so hard to cover up these things that were done in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, when we're almost 100 years away, right? Well, 60, 70 years, whatever it is, away from this. Why won't we just admit what we did in the past and move forward, right? Why are the governments covering these things up so greatly, so far down the road?
The answer to that is that just prior to the Cold War, the Allied nations, and the Allied nations is Australia, America, Canada, England, and New Zealand, all agreed, even though, we don't have bioweapons, nobody would do that. We've signed different treaties that nobody will, but guess what? We'll just do it on the side. The Allied nations all agreed and mandated they would use insects as bioweapons. Now, the Japanese did it with mosquitoes. All these, they did it independently, but the Allied nations have an agreement and a mandate that they would use tick-borne illness as a bioweapon, and that it was not to be treated and it was not to be discussed. It was never to be acknowledged. So now Australia runs that to the bone, and I know Canada does too.
So Julie, the Allied nations, right? Australia, Canada, America, Britain, France, etc. You're saying after World War II, they came together and they banned bioweapons through all these treaties for peace, right? So they're banning bioweapons, but are you saying they had this unofficial nod or this unofficial agreement that we're all going to start to investigate ticks as bioweapons and just, turn a blind eye, for lack of a better word, to all of the illnesses that come of this?
Yes, that's right. Now, I believe part of it is deliberate population control. I believe it has been used through the military, but it's still being used for very, very nefarious reasons. I've just discovered also that there is a military base near the head office of the CSIRO, and that military base and the CSIRO have been, and Sydney University have been, want of a better word, involved and collaborated on MK Ultra Naomi, which came out during the Cold War as well. And the military, Australian military, have been developing aerosol spray cans like bug bombs, which have been used on women who have reported satanic ritual abuse by who are they? Oh, it's just
take
gone
time, Julie. No, I look, this is a lot of information here, and I know it's all in your book too. This is where I want to give a shout out again to everybody to listen to your to go read your book, because all of this is in a very easy to read manner there. So that's a really nice way to go digest all this information. But I do want to pivot over because look, there's a ton of things going on beyond tick-borne illnesses and beyond ticks as a bioweapon. And, unfortunately, that's the reality of the world, nations, history, etc. But one person you didn't really touch on much was Dr. Alan Steer, who we hear a lot in the bioweapon and the Lyme politics. So you did touch on Bergdorfer, you touched on Eric Traub, you touched on the Nazis. You gave me the chills when you talked about, what was his name? The number 2 to Hitler that was over in Australia.
Mengele.
Mingala. But
Joseph Mengele, we've got.
Joseph Mingala. Now, tell me about Dr. Alan Steer and what his role was with all of this when it comes to corruption, cover-ups, and bioweapons.
Well, again, Alan Steer, I believe, was on the take. He was making a lot of money from different sources. He was a double agent as well. I think they all were. And being paid to stymie information. The whole idea of Lyme disease was that it was hard to detect. It was even harder to treat. And Steer wrote some really bad papers to deflect from Lyme disease, to say that, you'll get a bit of arthritis, you get a bit of a temperature, you get over it. He deliberately deflected the danger to human beings that this thing created, and also paid very handsomely. They all were.
Well, it's interesting. We have Dr. Jorge Banach, who was out of Stony Brook University, where I live, right? That's probably 10 minutes from where I am right now. And a lot of these people right here on Long Island were around the Lyme controversies back then. And he went from saying initially, Lyme can be a chronic illness, it's debilitating, it can affect your entire body, to saying it's no big deal. And then fighting and working with the state medical board to remove licenses of doctors who were trying to help people with Lyme disease. And then before he ended up passing away, he turned around and said, you know what, this really is a serious disease. So it makes you wonder, was this just based off of findings and evolving beliefs due to research, or was there more at stake? Because you went from taking a position of Lyme as being such a serious, diverse, debilitating disease to saying, it's no big deal. And that seems like a pretty stark contrast for me to be able to do a 180 like that so quickly, right? And Kelsey's going to jump in too. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to go back to, our discussion about the bioweapons and stuff. I know myself and a lot of other people with chronic Lyme disease, when COVID started coming about and there were talks about that, being created in a lab and being sent, overseas and whatever, we were all kind of hoping that would kind of, and I feel like a lot of the US, and I don't know about the whole world, was kind of receptive to that in a way. And I had kind of hoped, and I know a lot of other people did, that would kind of open people's eyes to Lyme and other tick-borne diseases, that being a reality rather than us being these crazy conspiracy theorists that they like to think that we are. Yeah. Do you think that COVID kind of swayed things in that direction a little bit?
That's a tricky question, and it's two-pronged in that when I wrote my book and I started to talk to people through my Facebook group, they laughed and said, couldn't be a bioweapon, you're barking up the wrong tree. And, it took me a long time to get through to these people that it is in fact a bioweapon. You can grieve, you can deny it like I did, but eventually you'll have to come to terms with it, like I did. And they've done this 180 and gone, wow, we've really been done, all of us throughout the world, we've been done. COVID came, there was no way that vax was coming near me, because I was already suspicious with what I discovered. I wasn't doing it. And now I'm preparing, I've got nearly 3,000 viewers, preparing people for this dodgy bird flu that's being spruiked all over the world. So since COVID, they have woken up. An awful lot of them are going, well, we're not going near that. We know it's a bioweapon. And I've showed my viewers patents. I explain it. And you know what? They've turned around. They've turned around. There's some that still go, but I'm finding that they're usually the older generation because they still believe their government does the right thing by them. They couldn't be hurt by their government, and they will continue to believe in their authoritarian way that they always did. So there has been a turnaround. And I'm pleased to see that.
Well, and I think I know for me personally, when I kind of started doing my own research and realizing that Lyme was a bioweapon, and almost created this anger within me.
Oh, yes.
Anger, but also
That's
like,
why you write books.
but also like, not like I'm super angry at them, screw them. I mean, yes, I felt that way, but also it's more of like I'm going to show them kind of anger, like they did this to me. I'm going to get better and prove them wrong. It was almost like like an encouragement to get better.
Yes.
Once you
Yes.
kind of turn that corner.
Yep. They don't care whether you die or you get better. I've realized, that that's not part of the program. I still believe that there's part of this thing that is population control. And even I go back to Sydney University, this eugenist, Dr. Frank Burnett, he was creating bioweapons at the same time Fort Detrick was. So he was working out how you could kill off Asians by the hundreds of thousands by using different viruses in chickens and eggs.
Yeah,
pretty simple idea, really.
Julie, I want to circle back to the concept of population control, but I just want to back what you're saying because, as you're talking, I'm doing some research. I'm using some AI and some searches here to kind of look things up. And right off the bat, I get this from 2019, and we know it's since been blocked at further levels of government. But I'm going to read you a quick little snippet here. The U.S. House of Representatives. So this is the, United States Congress. And this is, again, a CNN article. The U.S. House of Representatives has ordered an investigation into whether the Department of Defense experimented with ticks and other insects as biological weapons. In an amendment passed last week, the House called for the Defense Department's Inspector General to look at whether any such experiments were done between the years of 1950 and 1975. But here's the key part. The amendment was introduced by New Jersey Rep. Chris Smith, and I said before Governor, I apologize. It's New York, Jersey
Yes.
Rep. Chris Smith,
Familiar with it, yes.
Who said he was inspired to write it by and I quote, a number of books, I think yours, Julie, and articles suggesting that significant research had been done at U.S. government facilities, including Fort Detrick, Maryland, and Plum Island, New York, to turn ticks and other insects into bioweapons. Exactly what you just described, right? So I got chills when I read that because I'm like, that's exactly what you're saying in your book. So, I mean, these are U.S. Congress people. These are people that are, not crazy conspiracy theorists. This is something that's real, and I think we need to get the word out. So that's really just backing up everything you just said. But let's talk about the population control, because we've had others argue that it's actually the opposite, right? I think Chris Newby actually kind of had a counter argument here, where these bioweapons that were created from ticks were not meant to kill, but debilitate, right? So especially during the Cold War, the idea was to drop infected ticks in a population that was getting ready to go to a war, and it would debilitate the population. So whoever was healthy would be forced to take care of those who are essentially bedridden, and they wouldn't be able to go to war and fight these wars, right? So they weren't designed to kill. They were designed to sort of debilitate, but keep you alive suffering. So how would you respond to that, which is like a different view on what you said?
I actually sought advice from Chris because her book was just being published when I'd nearly finished mine, and I thought, this thing's wild. Nobody's going to believe any of this sort of thing. She said it's okay because you've nailed it. I'm not as kind with certain people as Chris was, and I let her know why. I also believe that with the CSIRO, Fort Detrick, which continues to build bioweapons, that they've upped the ante since Bergdorfer and Traub to make this thing diabolically more poisonous. Now, I'll go back to the aerosol cans that I've discovered were produced by our own military. They were used on women who had reported to the police sexual assault by Masons. Their houses were broken into, and these aerosol cans. Now, I don't. Do you have bug sprays over there, like
Yep,
bug bombs?
we do.
Yep. Were found in their houses, deployed with hundreds of thousands of nymph ticks running around their homes. They were all bitten, obviously. They all have chronic Lyme disease. And it was a varietal of tick that's never been seen in Australia before. So you can't tell me that the powers to be are not playing with upping the ante on these ticks.
So your belief is that maybe at one point it was meant to debilitate, but you think they've taken it up a notch and they're now trying to have a blend of bioweapons to debilitate and another blend of bioweapons to kill for population control, to be clear, right?
Look, call me old-fashioned and suspicious, but I really am suspicious now, and particularly after the COVID incidents, and I'm seeing how many deaths have happened there. We can't estimate in Australia how many people we've lost to Lyme disease. It's a long, slow death. We don't have registers here because we don't have Lyme disease in Australia, so we can't tell. You have better records to a point, if you can trust the CDC, than we do. And look, I'm just thinking they have upped the ante here, especially with these tick bombs being used on rape victims.
Yeah, I think the good news here, Julie, is, and this is sort of the silver lining, because it's a really, really horrible situation, but the more people that are getting sick and the more people that are speaking up like yourself, the harder it is for people to suppress the truth, right? No matter how much the government's try to cover it up, no matter how many people try to deny its existence because they're worried about their medical licenses, when people are sick and they're starting to learn the truth because of brave people like yourself and Chris Newby and others, then it's not going to be able to be withheld anymore. And I think we're starting to see that. The hopeful side of me is starting to think, especially here in the States, and I don't want to speak for Australia, but we just posted something the other day on our social media, how these major news outlets are citing that the CDC is talking about the severity of Lyme disease and how it can be chronic. Now, they don't use the word chronic Lyme, they call it post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, but they are recognizing that this is a long-term debilitating chronic illness. And they're recognizing that there's a lot to it that we don't fully understand yet. Now, I think that, that's a step in the right direction. And the more we have people at the governmental level and the advocacy level like yourselves, the better off we're going to be as a community.
I look to you guys for inspiration. I do. And, a lot of my viewers, I think I've got probably more American viewers than Australian viewers. And I can tell you why, because it's a population variation in that, our population is 26 million. Yours is 333.3 million. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
So people, I just forgot again. Sorry.
No, but as you're talking, I'm having all these thoughts. I'm glad you paused there, because a lot of this too, because a lot of people say, and people listening to this podcast may be thinking, why is it some people get Lyme disease, quote unquote Lyme disease, and don't get sick and others do? And I think, the answer to that is depending on the tick that bites you. Was it a tick that was bioengineered? Was it a natural tick? Even if it's a natural tick, was it a natural tick that had multiple, pathogens, like it can have anaplasma, babesia, Borrelia, et cetera, et cetera, all these different tick-borne conditions.
Morgellons.
Yeah, Morgellons. And, and then beyond that, our own human bodies, the DNA of the tick, but the DNA in our own human bodies have an impact. Are we immune compromised to begin with? Do we have genetic predispositions? And COVID brought this to light as well. Why did some people get chronically ill from COVID and others did not, right? Why do we have this whole post-COVID, this, chronic COVID, long haul COVID, a lot of people are calling it different things, but that's been medically accepted. And that's the same thing with Lyme disease, right? And they're still identifying, well, what is it? Why is it? Is it activation of other things? But it's recognized. And I think that helped the Lyme community a little bit there as well. So Morgellons, quick side note, Morgellons, there was an article that came out. I love reading up on Lyme news. I love geeking out over it. I think it was 2 weeks ago, an article came out that was citing Morgellons cases, how every single Morgellons patient they tested, when they did biopsies and they did dark field microscopy of their blood, they were all Lyme positive as well. So there's definitely a connection there. Why? I can't tell you, right? I'm not a scientist. I'm just a regular guy. But the connections are being made, and there is a connection there. So I think that's a positive step as well.
So I know what I forgot, that we were talking about the states, talking about the states where I look for, the good news, the good influence, the people who are speaking about it, what they've said, how they've said it, and what the feedback is, because we get nothing here, absolutely nothing. We get, our information from the Australian Lyme Association, which I'm an ambassador for. We get information mainly from you guys. And, I wait to see what is new and what is happening and what is fresh. And definitely there has been a shift in attitude. We still have to wait and see what comes out of it, because remember, the Allied Nations made that pact. They mandated this thing as a bioweapon. Now, they've all got to get together and go, well, hey, guys, the class actions internationally are going to be crucifyingly shocking. Do we admit it or do we not? I don't think they will.
Well, I'm starting to see some
How long is
in that.
pact? Is there like a timeline to when that ends, or are there steps that need to be taken for that to finally come out? I mean, I'm sure that could take years.
Yeah, Nuremberg 2 trials, that would be the turnaround. And that's all I can see. I did my book also, and I will do another, as just evidence. And Chris's book, we'll all put it together. I would like to see military trials happen, because
Julie,
I don't think they're going to admit to it.
I do want to ask you, because something I've been thinking about, and I know from researching you and reading up on you that this is all fact-based research you've done. But a lot of people thinking might be wondering, where did you get your sources, right? Where are your facts coming from? So just give us a little bit of idea of how you did extremely thorough research from legitimate resources to source your book and all the content you shared on this podcast, which is even more in great detail in your book, The Australian Lyme Crimes, A Global Disgrace.
Look, as I said, I learnt from Alan Steer what was a good medical paper as opposed to a really shocking medical paper that wasn't truthful. So another shock to the system is that I thought science told the truth. It doesn't. So I would dig further and further to find the evidence that I was looking for. I knew it would be there somewhere. It's covered. It took a lot of time, but the evidence is there. And more evidence is coming to hand now that comes to me. I have in place a university in Australia, can't say where, that's looking into the bloods of certain people, including myself, where we'll get some more answers definitively to Lyme disease, to the co-infections, to, you say Morgellons, I say Morgellons, to Morgellons. We'll have a better picture of the Australian bioweapon, and we're going to compare it to what's in yours with the evidence that I've found. I mean, I've done hundreds and thousands of hours of research like Chris Newby would have done as well. I put links in the book, so if people don't believe me, they can go and have a look at the paper themselves.
Yep. And that's the most brilliant part, that you've been able to actually share all this information and your sources, right? So you did thousands and thousands of hours of research that you sourced and put on your website and your book, so people can go and fast track their learning about all this information. And Kelsey, I think you wanted to jump in too.
You know, I think it'll be very beneficial what you're working on to figure out where it comes from too. But on a more like grander scope, like what Matt was talking about, how, you know, a lot of things come into play. I think another thing that I would like to know too, and I don't know if this can be evidence-based research, but for me personally, you know, because I think trauma is a big factor too, and just like lifestyle in general, the way that we live our lives, you know, how busy we are, and just the normal stressors that come along with it. I found personally that I began to start feeling a little bit better once I got out of an abusive relationship. And I had this discussion with my therapist, and not even just with Lyme, but just all autoimmune disease in general. And she said, you know, it's not uncommon for women, especially that are going through something traumatic, whether it be emotional or physical abuse, to develop autoimmune like illnesses or have illnesses like Lyme disease that were somewhat dormant kind of come back out, because your body's just constantly stuck in fight or flight. And I think that's such a big part of this as well.
Yes. I agree with you. As I mentioned earlier, you know, I'm sure I was living with tick-borne illness for, you know, quite some years before, you know, my girlfriend died this week, and I wrote my car off, and it all bloomed, for want of a better word, it bloomed. So I think if you're healthy, I think if you have a good lifestyle, you can override some of these infections. But given that they lay dormant, it only takes a traumatic experience for it to shoot back out again. Now, I deliberately now try to stay stress-free as much as possible. I eat well, I take all my herbals, because I know that if I don't, I could go 3 steps back again. And I want to go out tomorrow night. So I want to feel okay to go out, you know. The thing with Lyme is when we're not well, and I like to go out with the girls and do the things that we do. I spend money on tickets, and then I wake up in the morning and go, oh my God, I'm not going to get out of bed today. And, you know, and I waste money. But I try my hardest to maintain a normal lifestyle. I hope it inspires my readers that I will try as hard as I can to get out there. I drink so much water, and you know, I just try and do all the right things and stay drama free, if you like, and it does help. But one of the suspicions that I have as well is that we're covered in chemtrails 24/7 here. And I'm now convinced, and I know what's in those chemtrails, that they're not helping us get any better. So we're struggling that bit harder as well, given that all these heavy metals have to be dealt with within our bodies, because they're making us sick too. They're making healthy people sick, and they don't understand why.
Yeah,
And
modern world, Julie, for sure, is not conducive for health, right? From microplastics to increased toxins to the high stress lifestyle to the technology, we call it the iPad kid lifestyle, right? All these things are not good for mental health, physical
the
health.
water, the food preservatives,
Yep.
all the other junk that's happening,
Pesticides.
we're aware of it. And I would like to hope that many other Limeys are aware of it too. I won't go outside when the place is full of chemtrails. When I see it, I go, no, not going out today. And I have to sort of reorganize myself, but I don't want to put myself in that position. It's like I don't want to put myself in a position of trauma or drama if I can avoid it. The same is said with
the world that we live in. It's just we can reduce our toxins as much as possible, but it's virtually impossible to live a toxin-free life in the world that we live in today.
Yes.
But I think the biggest message we want to put out there is you can reduce it.
You have to reduce it. If you want to feel okay-ish on a day-to-day level, you have to be very aware what goes into the body. You have to. Now, I know what chemtrails have done to me in that I went to Paris a couple of years ago, and they do not stop spraying 24/7. I mean, it's disgusting. And people are not looking at the sky. My girlfriend that I traveled with went, "What's that?" And I said, "Oh, they're chemtrails." She went, "Conspiracy theory." I went, "Yeah, righto." But when I traveled, the Morgellons just burst out of my skin. I developed eczema. I got sick, I got sick. And I thought I was perfectly fine when I got here, and now I'm not. Look up in the
I think there are so many factors or triggers, especially when we're fighting to rebuild our health. And we know what these triggers are, and we have to take conscious steps to limit our triggers and exposure so we can keep moving forward and not fall back if we're aware of these things, right? So, Julie, we've had you for over an hour, so I'm gonna end this here and just say I'm so happy that you teased us by saying you're gonna write a second book potentially, because now we're gonna get a part 2 to this beautiful, I shouldn't say beautiful. It's been inspiring. It's been beautiful talking to you, Julie, because it's a really, really horrible thing, but it's giving me hope that people like you are so brave to raise awareness despite all the obstacles. And it gives me hope for the future of our community. So that's what I mean by the beautifulness of your story. And the more you keep pushing and the more you keep advocating, the more we're going to get the help that we need. So I really want to tell everybody, go to your website, AustralianLymeCrimes.com. Buy your book, Australian Lyme Crimes, The Global Disgrace, and be on the lookout for a second book coming soon. And I can't thank Kelsey for coming back to join me as my co-host for a third time on the Tick Bootcamp podcast. This has been a wonderful, informative podcast that gives me hope, despite all of the terror and tragedy and horrible stuff that we've talked about. There is hope in this podcast, and I don't want to lose sight of that, Julie. So thank you both so much for joining our Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Matt, thanks for having me. Kelsey, lovely to meet you. I think we've been in communication for about a year now to organise this. So, lovely to meet everybody. And, I'm looking to America for change of legislation because, the Allied forces will look up to you. Please keep on going. Please push, push, push.